What a wonderful organization all of us belong to. In 150 years, PEO has helped many women pursue their educational goals. It has encouraged every one of us to continue our own personal education. As we acknowledge at the opening of every PEO meeting, one of the aims of our sisterhood is to see growth in knowledge and in culture. In this anniversary year, I know that I will give special thanks on Thanksgiving Day that I am a PEO. Which brings me to the topic of my presentation today, PEO and the spirit of Thanksgiving. In the years I spent researching the history of Thanksgiving, I learned a lot of surprising and fascinating things about the evolution of the holiday. The date of Thanksgiving, for example, wasn't fixed until 1941, when Congress finally passed legislation naming the fourth Thursday of November as Thanksgiving Day. Another example of change is the role of the Pilgrims and the Native Americans in our image of Thanksgiving. This is almost impossible to believe, but it wasn't until the 19th century that the Pilgrims and the Indians became associated with Thanksgiving, after long-lost Pilgrim-era documents were discovered. So too, Thanksgiving dinner has evolved over the centuries. Yes, turkey was probably on the menu in Plymouth in 1621, but it was a sideshow to venison, corn, lobster, and more. In the year Thanksgiving was founded, in the year PEO was founded, 1869, Thanksgiving Day fell on November 18. It was the third Thursday of the month. The Civil War had ended only 4 years earlier, and in his Thanksgiving proclamation, President Ulysses S. Grant expressed gratitude for the blessings of peace. He asked Americans to be thankful that, quote, civil and religious liberty are secured to every inhabitant of the land, whose soil is trod by none but free men. The 7 founders would have celebrated the holiday in a familiar fashion, with roast turkey as the centerpiece of a big family dinner. For dessert, they probably had, you guessed it, pie. 1869 was the year that Harriet Beecher Stowe, the famous author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, published another novel. The book was called Old Town Folks, and in it she gave a description of the amazing dessert course at one Thanksgiving dinner. Pies were made by the 40s and 50s and hundreds, she wrote, and made of everything under the sun. On the screen is a list of some of the varieties she mentioned. Thanksgiving pies, Stowe said, attested to the boundless fertility of the feminine mind. Oh, and if you did not like pie for dessert, in her fictional Thanksgiving dinner, guests could also choose from among plum pudding, several kinds of cake, and an assortment of fruit. The founders were all women of faith, and in 1869, it is likely that they attended worship services on Thanksgiving morning. Union services were commonplace. That is, local Protestant congregations would come together to hold a joint service on Thanksgiving morning. A columnist for one Iowa newspaper deplored what he called the beggarly attendance at the Union service in Cedar Rapids in 1869. He suggested that Iowans ought to be less interested in dinner and more interested in giving thanks to God. Such grumblings, by the way, weren't new. As far back as the 17th century, there were complaints that people focused more on family and food on Thanksgiving Day than on worship. 1869 was the year that Harper's Weekly magazine published a Thanksgiving cartoon by illustrator Thomas Nast. The PEO founders likely would have seen this famous cartoon, titled Uncle Sam's Thanksgiving Dinner. It depicts Americans of many races, religions, and ethnicities seated around a Thanksgiving table. Uncle Sam is carving a turkey at the head of the table. Among his guests are an African-American family, a Native American with feathers in his hair, a Chinese man with a long queue, a Spanish woman wearing a mantilla and holding a fan, and a bearded Muslim man with a fez on his head. Nast presents the people in this portrait respectfully, not as caricatures. His message is that every American is welcome at the Thanksgiving table. Americans have been celebrating Thanksgiving since the time of the Pilgrims. And by the time of the American Revolution, Thanksgiving was a well-established tradition in the 13 colonies. It was both a religious holiday and an occasion for festive family gatherings. Then, in the fall of 1789, President George Washington, who had just taken office in April, proclaimed America's first Thanksgiving as a nation. He requested that the governors declare Thanksgivings in their respective states. When PEO's founders were little girls, Iowa's Thanksgiving date was established by the governor of Iowa, not by the President of the United States. Not every state celebrated Thanksgiving, but those that did celebrated on a day set by their governors. The confusing result was that the date of Thanksgiving Day varied from state to state. Most states celebrated sometime in November, but a few marked the holiday in October or even in early December. Then, in 1863, Lincoln decided to call a national Thanksgiving. What or who motivated him to do so? The answer is a remarkable woman who is often called the godmother of Thanksgiving. Her name is Sarah Josepha Hale, and as I will explain, her life story has particular relevance to PEO. Hale was the editor of Godey's Lady's Book, the most popular magazine of the antebellum period, and one of the most influential periodicals of its day. Women in every corner of the United States read the Lady's Book. Its circulation also extended to Canada, where, according to the magazine, it had subscribers in Montreal, Quebec City, Winnipeg, Toronto, and elsewhere. For many years, Hale used the pages of her powerful magazine to campaign for a national Thanksgiving. As the country moved towards civil war, she believed that a national celebration of Thanksgiving would help preserve the Union. The celebration of Thanksgiving had what she called a deep moral influence on the character of the nation. She wrote of how Thanksgiving would greatly expand the generous feelings of our nature. During her lifetime, Hale was one of the most famous and respected women in America. She was a household name, and the PEO founders, their mothers, and their grandmothers would surely have read her magazine. Godey's Lady's Book was well known for its hand-tinted fashion plates, which are now collector's items, and perhaps there's somebody in the audience who has one framed and hanging on the wall of her home. But Hale and her magazine were even better known for something else, something that is close to the heart of every PEO: women's education. Hale was enormously influential in helping Americans accept the idea that women should be educated. By the time of her death in 1879, many colleges across the country were open to women, including Iowa Wesleyan, where PEO was founded. Without her work, who knows? It's possible that Iowa Wesleyan might not have opened its doors to women. The founders never would have met, and PEO would not exist. Allow me to give Sarah Josepha Hale a high accolade. She would have made a wonderful PEO. So, in closing, let me propose the revival of a Thanksgiving custom that will help us remember. It bears a curious title, 5 Kernels of Corn, and it refers to the practice of placing 5 kernels of dried corn on the Thanksgiving table. The tradition got its start in 1820 at a grand dinner in Plymouth, Massachusetts, celebrating the bicentennial of the arrival of the Mayflower in the New World. At this dinner, every guest found 5 kernels of corn at his place setting. The 5 kernels of corn were humble reminders of the reason for the gathering. They represented the starving time when the pilgrims had little to eat and legend has it that they survived on a daily ration of 5 kernels of parched Indian corn. The legend is probably untrue. There is no mention of it in primary sources of the day, but that didn't stop it from taking a life of its own, and soon 5 kernels of corn were appearing on Thanksgiving tables across the nation. The most important aspect of the Thanksgiving spirit is, of course, gratitude. Thanksgiving is about giving thanks, however an individual chooses to do so. In PEO's sesquicentennial year, I'd like to suggest a call to action for PEOs. On Thanksgiving Day, I challenge every one of us to pause for a moment to give thanks for our sisterhood, for the fine work it does on behalf of education for women, and for the individual PEOs who make a positive difference in our lives. Thank you, and allow me to be the first to wish you a happy Thanksgiving.